So basically, this is where we stopped last time. Okay, we have been talking about the spinal cord and also reflexes is what we need to talk about. But last time I was explaining how receptors are classified, okay, and that information can be somatic or visceral. In somatic information, it's involving exteroceptors and proprioceptors, okay? And I was explaining that receptors are part of sensory neurons, okay? And they're monitoring their function is to monitor the environment, okay? And the information that they're monitoring is with regard to touch, temperature, somatic pain, and special senses here, like olfaction, visual, gustation, audition, this kind of thing. Okay, auditory, I should say, auditory information. And also responding to the position and movements of the body, or its parts. Okay, that is also somatic information. Okay, you can see these receptors are located in the muscle spindle, like within the muscle, or within the tendon, or even the capsules of organs. I mean, capsules actually are capsules of joints, joint capsules. Sorry, not organs, joint capsules. Okay. So you want to know for the exam, okay, what proprioceptors, the type of information that proprioceptors are picking up. Okay, this is the type of information that they're picking up. The type of information that exteroceptors are picking up. Okay, and you can see it here in red. Okay, again, this is auditory. Okay. Okay, so if we look at those receptors, which are located in the, outside of the central nervous system, okay, so they're in the peripheral nervous system. So if we see those receptors, we see them here, right? We see them here. And you can see that once a stimulus is picked up, okay, then an action potential will be generated. And you can see that in the peripheral nervous system, we have groups of cell bodies of sensory neurons, and we call those peripheral ganglia, okay? So, and then we're going to have here the process, okay? The process that is going to extend, like the axon, okay? That is going to extend into the central nervous system, and that information is going to be passed on or relayed to a somatic motor neuron located in the anterior gray horn, okay? And those motor neurons are going to control voluntary activities like skeletal muscle, okay? Skeletal muscle activity. You can also see that the information can be passed on as well to interneurons. And from interneurons, it can be passed on to somatic motor neurons, and it can also be taken to the brain as well. Okay. Now, if you look at the interoceptors here, notice that the pathway here is going to be towards the visceral motor neurons. Visceral motor neurons are located in the lateral gray horns of the spinal cord. And notice that the cell bodies are here, okay? And then you have a long process that is going to extend from the central nervous system to the peripheral nervous system. So that first neuron that you see here, is called a preganglionic neuron. Preganglionic neuron. And that's going to synapse or come together with a postganglionic neuron, where there is a group of them in the peripheral nervous system, or many or groups of them, and we call that again ganglia, but it's going to be called visceral or autonomic ganglia. Okay, and these are cell bodies of motor neurons in this case. The ones here are cell bodies of sensory neurons. Okay, but these ones are cell bodies of motor neurons. So, and it is those postganglionic neurons that are going to control the effector cells here. This has to do with the autonomic nervous system, visceral. So this information, these effectors are going to be involuntary. Okay, so like smooth muscle, glands, cardiac muscle, and adipose tissue. Okay. Also, you can see that interoceptors can also synapse with an interneuron, and that information can be passed on to a visceral motor neuron, and then or a preganglionic neuron, and that's going to take it to a postganglionic neuron, and it's going to control the effector organs. There's different reflexes, spinal reflexes we're talking about here, okay, that can be monosynaptic, like a sensory neuron coming together with a motor neuron in the spinal cord, or it can be polysynaptic, meaning that you have an interneuron in between. Okay, so you're gonna see some of these reflexes. We're gonna be learning reflexes, but a lot of times we're gonna be learning somatic reflexes. Okay, there is visceral reflexes, but there is also somatic reflexes. And by the way, if you go all the way, there should be a table in here. Okay, and but these are reflexes. Okay, but let's continue on. Some of these, like the plantar reflex, are considered superficial reflexes, and and the patellar reflex here is considered a stretch reflex. But let's continue. Let's go back here. Okay, so let's continue on. But notice that they don't go too much on this part right here. Okay, they don't go over these reflexes too much. They go over the other reflexes that includes skeletal muscle. All right, so this picture, in this image, you can see that we have this is going to be exteroceptors and proprioceptors, So this is somatic sensory information. Okay, somatic sensory information. This one is located in the back. This one is located in the body wall and limbs here. Again, when you read about what proprioceptors are and exteroceptors are and the type of information, you can have a better understanding of what's going on here. Okay, notice that this information, that is picked up by exteroceptors and proprioceptors, they're going to be received by somatic sensory nuclei in the posterior great horn. We also have information picked up by interoceptors from the back, from the body wall and limbs, and from internal organs, okay? And that information is going to be received by visceral sensory nuclei or visceral sensory, cell bodies of sensory neurons that are going to be receiving visceral, information picked up by interoceptors. So a lot of times they don't ask you questions about these type of information. Okay, we focus more on this one here. Okay, so you can see that this is motor information. The other one was sensory. This one is motor. So so you can have a better understanding of these motor commands, okay? So we have somatic motor commands that are going to be sent by somatic motor neurons located in the spinal cord, in the gray matter of the anterior gray horn. So this one, you know, to distinguish it from the other one, is in blue, is in different color. So if you follow this neuron here, notice that the axons, they are found in the anterior root or ventral root. They get to the spinal nerve, and you can either go to the back by way of the dorsal ramus of the spinal nerve, or you can go to the body wall and limbs, and that will be following the ventral ramus of the spinal nerve. Okay, so we're looking at what these neurons located in the anterior gray horn, what their names are, and who are they controlling. Okay, so you can see that they are controlling skeletal muscles of the back and skeletal muscles of the body wall and limbs. If you look at the visceral motor nuclei here, these motor neurons, they're controlling involuntary structures. Okay, so if you follow their track, you know, if you follow their pathway here, you can see that their axons, once again, they go into the anterior root or ventral root. They get to the spinal nerve, but notice that when they get here, they go into the rami communicantes. Okay, so it goes into the preganglionic. This is called preganglionic. This is the white, by the way, this is the white ramus communicantes, and it's also known as preganglionic because the postganglionic neuron here is in black. Okay, and this has to do with the sympathetic nervous system here. Okay, so I just want you to know that a preganglionic neuron can synapse with a postganglionic neuron in this peripheral autonomic ganglion here, okay, sympathetic ganglion. If it synapses there, as you can see there, and then it returns back to the spinal nerve, it does it by way of the gray ramus communicantes. Okay, when you get to the spinal nerve, then it can go towards the back or towards the body wall and limbs. Okay, but what type of information, what type of commands, who are they targeting? They're targeting, you know, smooth muscles and glands of the back, or smooth muscles and glands of the body wall and limbs. Okay. Now, if that postganglionic neuron does not return to the spinal nerve, and then it decides to go forward, it will form a sympathetic nerve that is going to be controlling visceral organs in the thoracic cavity. Okay. Now, if the preganglionic neuron does not synapse with the postganglionic neuron in the located in the autonomic ganglia in the peripheral nervous system involving the sympathetic nerve, you know, this one here. If it doesn't synapse there with the neuron over here, then it will form again sympathetic nerves, but they're going to be heading into abdominal pelvic viscera. Okay, so that's what I want you to know. So what happens? You know, if the preganglionic neuron synapses, it can either, the postganglionic neuron can either go back or it can go forward and not return to the spinal nerve. If it doesn't return, a postganglionic neuron heads to visceral organs in the thoracic cavity. Okay, if it does return to the spinal nerve, it's targeting smooth muscle and glands of the back and in the body wall and limbs. If the preganglionic neuron does not synapse at all and continues on, it forms a sympathetic nerve and is heading to the abdominal pelvic viscera. And that's what I want you to know from that. Okay, now we're going to talk about spinal nerves and nerve plexuses, how spinal nerves can form nerve plexuses. So the first thing that we need to know is that what a nerve plexus is. So a nerve plexus is, okay, a nerve plexus is the union, is formed by the union of the ventral rami of the anterior rami of the spinal nerves. So a specific ventral rami of spinal nerves, okay? For example, the cervical plexus forms by the union of the ventral rami of cervical spinal nerves 1 through 5. Okay, 1 through 5. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, 1 through 5. So I hope you understand this. Okay, so you know the spinal nerve, the first cervical spinal nerve, it gives a dorsal ramus and a ventral ramus. So if the ventral ramus meets with C2, you know, and C2 with C3 and so forth, you know, but if you have a union of the ventral rami of cervical spinal nerves 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, you form what is known as a cervical plexus. The cervical plexus, it's targeting structures in the neck and the diaphragm. Okay, neck and diaphragm. So the main nerve, the main peripheral nerve that is derived from this cervical plexus is the phrenic nerve. Is the phrenic nerve. The phrenic nerve is targeting the diaphragm. Okay. So there's other nerves, but we're not putting too much attention to those. You know, I want you to know the phrenic nerve, that is a peripheral nerve that is derived from the cervical plexus, okay, or receives contribution from the cervical plexus, and is targeting the diaphragm. Now, when you have the union of the ventral rami of C5, of spinal nerve, cervical spinal nerve number 5, number 6, number 7, number 8, and thoracic spinal nerve number 1, then you form what is known as the brachial plexus. The brachial plexus, you're going to have peripheral nerves that are going to be targeting or controlling specific muscles. Like, for example, we have the axillary nerve, the musculocutaneous nerve, the radial nerve, the median nerve, the ulnar nerve. All of those are peripheral nerves that are derived or receive contribution from the brachial plexus. Okay, so for example, the axillary nerve controls the deltoid, and it also controls the teres minor. You know, teres minor is one of the rotator cuff muscles. The deltoid is the main abductor of the arm, right? The musculocutaneous nerve is another peripheral nerve. That one is controlling the biceps brachii, the brachialis, the coracobrachialis. So that's who is controlling. Okay, there is more. There is more. There is, you know, they're not telling you that here. The radial nerve controls most of the extensors. Most of the extensors. Okay, so the extensor muscles of the wrist. Okay, just wanted to double check on something here. Let's see, the brachioradialis, brachioradialis, brachioradialis might be controlled by the radial nerve. I just wanted to double check that. I think that is the let me see here. Yeah, it's controlled by the radial nerve. Yeah, I know that. So the musculocutaneous nerve, we can just say that it controls the biceps brachii, but the radial nerve controls the triceps, brachii, you know, the extensor digitorum, you know, the extensor carpi, radialis longus and brevis, the extensor carpi ulnaris, the extensor muscles. Okay. But he also controls the flexor muscle, like the brachioradialis. The median nerve controls the muscles like the flexor carpi radialis, the palmaris longus. You know, the ulnar nerve controls the flexor carpi ulnaris, for example. So if I do mention any of these muscles being controlled by any of these nerves, that will be in the review. Okay, so that's, but I don't want to take time into doing that here. Okay, but notice that the compression of the median nerve is implicated in carpal tunnel syndrome. So people that do a lot of manual work like housekeeping, or secretaries with their with their typing and things like that. They can have inflammation in the wrist area, and that can put compression on the median nerve, and you're gonna have like numbness and tingling and pain in some of your fingers and hands, of the hand. So so that's especially like when you're sleeping, it's like you need to be operated, or you need to take this into account, because it is just hard to live with, like with in pain. The lumbar plexus is it's formed by the union of the ventral rami of thoracic spinal nerve number 12, L1, L2, L3, and L4. Okay, so that is the lumbar plexus. The main nerve coming out of the lumbar plexus, or main peripheral nerve that receives contribution from the lumbar plexus, is the femoral nerve, and that's the one that controls the quadriceps muscles, like the extensors of your leg. Then we have the sacral plexus, which is formed by the union of the ventral rami of lumbar spinal nerve number 4, 5, as sacral 1, sacral 2, sacral 3, and sacral 4, sacral spinal nerves. Okay, so L4 to S4. And the main peripheral nerve that receives contribution from the sacral plexus is the sciatic nerve that controls your hamstrings and the muscles of your lower leg. Okay, so this is interesting. Okay, this is very interesting. Now, the thoracic nerves, they don't form plexus. They do not form a plexus. Okay. So let's continue. So now we're getting into reflexes. Okay. So reflexes, the first thing that you want to know is, why are they important? So they're essential to the maintenance, or for the maintenance of homeostasis, to keep you safe. Okay. And what are they? The rapid automatic involuntary responses to a specific stimuli. So this is an automatic response to a specific stimulus. Okay. Do not get too hanged up with this word involuntary, because you have no control. But what happens is that it can create confusion, because you're like saying, like, well, this is skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle is not voluntary. It's not involuntary, it's voluntary. But what it's saying here is that there's going to be a response that you can't help it. It's something that you're going to do regardless. Okay, so it's automatic, and it's rapid. Okay, and notice that there is 5 components of a reflex arc. Okay, we have a receptor that is going to pick up the stimulus. This case is a painful stimulus. That receptor is part of a sensory neuron. So you're going to have here a peripheral process and a central process. So this is going to carry on the message, okay, the action potential. The action potential is going to be received. This is somatic pain here. So it's going to be received by some somatic sensory nuclei in the posterior great horn. And that's going to be passed on to a motor neuron in the anterior great horn. And the motor neuron is going to send a command to the effector organ, which is in this case the skeletal muscle, and you're going to withdraw your hand. This is called the flexor reflex, because the biceps brachii is a flexor muscle. So that's how that works. Now, the interneuron is involved in processing of information, okay? And then once it's processed, once the information is integrated and processed, then it can be passed on to a motor neuron, or it can be sent to the brain. It can be sent to the brain. All right, so that's what we have here in terms of that. So let's see. Let's continue on over here. And one important thing to know is that neurotransmitters, neurotransmitters are released at the axon terminals, okay? And that will stimulate an effector to respond, okay? So in this case, a skeletal muscle, you're gonna have skeletal muscle contraction, and you're gonna pull away from where the stimulus is generated, so you're gonna pull away from there to protect you, okay? Now, reflexes can be classified by a number of ways, okay? By a number of ways. So I want you to be familiar with that. So for example, you can classify receptors based on their development, whether you're born with them or you acquire them or learn them after birth, okay? So if it's innate, it's genetically determined. You're born with it. You're born with a specific reflex. You don't have to learn that reflex, but acquired reflexes, they are learned after birth. So you need to know that for the exam. You need to know that there are reflexes that you learned after birth and reflexes that you are born with. Like for example, like if you put your finger on the mouth of a newborn, immediately they start sucking on your finger, like thinking it's a nipple. It's like they're trying to they're thinking that they're trying to feed themselves. So there are specific reflexes. For example, you can carry the baby, and if you pretend like to drop the baby, he will react, as well. And those are innate reflexes, okay? But learning like how to ride a bike, learning how to ski, learning how to rollerblade, learning, how to keep yourself in balance, those are learned reflexes, okay? Also, you try to touch, you see like a bright light and you want to touch it and you get burnt, these are, then you won't do it again, but if you experience something hot, immediately you're going to be alerted, that this can be a dangerous thing, okay? So reflexes can also be classified based on their nature of the response. So it can be somatic, which involves skeletal muscle, or it can be visceral, okay? So if the effector is, the nature of the response, okay? So if it's, it can be visceral and it can be somatic, okay? So that's how you can also classify reflexes. We have somatic reflexes. So the nature of the response, okay? So again, is if it's somatic information or if it's visceral information. The complexity of the circuit, okay? So if the information is being passed on from a sensory neuron to a motor neuron, that is monosynaptic. If you have an interneuron in between them, it's going to be polysynaptic, more than one synapse. Okay, so for example, the stretch reflex, like the patellar stretch reflex, that one is an example of a monosynaptic reflex, like you see here. Monosynaptic reflex, you can see that a sensory neuron is passing the information to a motor neuron. You don't have an interneuron in between. So the patellar stretch reflex is monosynaptic. Okay, so the stretch reflex. Now, also you can classify reflexes by their processing site. If the processing is happening in the spinal cord, you call it spinal reflexes. If it's happening in the brain, they're called cranial reflexes. Okay, and just so you know, I mean, here is a picture that shows you where the muscle spindle, where this is this internal structure here. In the muscle spindle is where you have the receptors, for the stretch reflex here. Okay, so you can see a sensory neurons carrying information to the central nervous system. So this will be the receptors here, okay? And you can see also that they are extrafusal fibers out here, and we also have intrafusal fibers, see here, inside, okay? And notice that they're being monitored by different motor neurons in the anterior great horn. So for example, alpha motor neurons in the anterior great horn, they control extrafusal fibers here, which are the primary fibers that are involved in extending the leg, you know. Inside the intrafusal fibers, they are controlled by gamma somatic motor neurons in the anterior great horn. Okay, so you want to keep that in mind. Like you have alpha and gamma somatic motor neurons, and so they could ask you about like gamma controls which fibers in the muscle. That will be intrafusal fibers, gamma, alpha extrafusal fibers. Okay, so let's continue. Here's some other stretch reflexes. Okay, so we have the biceps stretch reflex. We have the triceps stretch reflex. We have the ankle jerk reflex as well. Okay, so if we strike the tendon of the biceps brachii, we will flex the arm. If we strike the tendon of the triceps brachii, we extend the arm. If we strike the calcaneal tendon, which is formed by the gastrocnemius and soleus muscles, you will do plantar flexion. Okay, so all of these are stretch reflexes, and they're happening at the same side of the body, so they're ipsilateral. We have also, let's see, basically this is taking a closer look at the patellar reflex, okay? So we're talking about this one here, taking a closer look. So you can have a better understanding of the patellar reflex, because that's the one that, of the stretch reflexes, that's the one that they take into, for demonstration. That's the one that they show the most. So for example, when we strike the tendon here, the patellar tendon, then it stretches the muscle. So it stretches the muscle. Okay, the muscle is stretched, right? And then that stimulates the receptors in the muscle spindle. And a sensory neuron takes this information to the spinal cord. Okay, and this information, okay, is going to be passed on. It's going to be passed on to a motor neuron directly. That motor neuron is going to have a stimulatory effect to the quads muscles, and you're going to extend the leg. Okay, so this is monosynaptic. Okay, so if you know where you need to go, you can easily classify this reflex. Okay, so it's monosynaptic. But notice that this sensory neuron is also passing this information to a somatic sensory neuron, okay, and that one is inhibitory. So it's going to inhibit the hamstring muscles so that you can extend your leg, This is called reciprocal inhibition, by inhibiting the antagonist muscles here. Okay, so again, this is a type of reflex that happens on the same side of the body, so it's ipsilateral. Okay, so it occurs, the reflex occurs, or the response occurs at the same side of the stimulus. We have another reflex here. Okay, this reflex, which is called the Babinski reflex, is normal in infants less than 12 months of age. Sometimes they extend the age to 2 years old, like 24 months, because there might be a delay in development. But what happens here is that if you use the other side, the other end of the reflex hammer, and you run it, along the sole of the foot, you can see that they fan the toes. They do like dorsiflexion, and that's normal for if it's like less than 2 years of age. But after that, you should have plantar flexion. You should the response here should be plantar flexion. Okay, if it doesn't happen, then there is a problem with the corticospinal tract, the descending tracts here, the motor tracts. Okay, so this is called the plantar reflex, which is expected in adults, but it's the Babinski reflex that is expected in those that are 2 years of age or younger. Let's continue on. We have also the Golgi tendon reflex, which is antagonistic to the stretch reflex here, to the patellar reflex. So these ones are located in the tendon, okay, the Golgi tendon reflex. Okay, so it's opposite to the stretch reflex. It occurs when a muscle's tendon is under too much tension, causing the muscle to relax. So instead of causing the muscle to contract, like you saw in the patellar stretch reflex, we're gonna induce here muscle relaxation to protect the muscle from, so that you see here, prevents muscles from contracting too much, which could tear the tendon from the bone or muscle. It also helps distribute the workload more evenly across the muscle. So again, this is, notice that this is a polysynaptic reflex here. So when there is too much tension on the muscle, or too much tension here, located here, then you want to relax the muscle. Okay, so here is the inhibition. So notice that the sensory neuron from the tendon is going to send this information to an interneuron. Okay, and this is somatic information, and so we have one synapse here, and that interneuron is going to inhibit that dotted line here. It's going to inhibit the extensor muscle, causing it to relax more. You can also see that another interneuron here has a stimulatory effect to the hamstring muscles, so that you pull so you can flex your knee. Okay, so it's antagonistic, you see? So that's preventing this muscle from exerting too much tension on the tendon. It's a protective reflex. Let's continue. Here's the flexor reflex. The flexor reflex is triggered when you, in response to a painful stimulus. So let's say I grab something hot, then my receptors here pick up on that increase in temperature, and then you're going to send this information to the interneuron. The interneuron is going to pass it on to a motor neuron. So this is polysynaptic, and the motor neuron is going to affect this effector organ here, which is the biceps brachii muscle, and it's going to contract, and you're going to flex or withdraw the hand from the painful stimulus. So again, you can see another interneuron here that is going to be inhibiting the extensors of the back. This is reciprocal inhibition that also occurs here. And this information is sent to the brain, for memory, so that you don't do it again, okay? But this, the flexor reflex is also, polysynaptic. It's polysynaptic as well. We have what is known as the crossed extensor reflex as well. So this one, let's say you step on a nail. So if you step on a nail, then you're going to send this painful signal along a sensory neuron. It's going to bind with an interneuron, and the interneuron is going to notice that one of the interneuron is going to so it's going to inhibit the extensor muscles of your leg, and it's going to stimulate the flexor muscles, so you can bring up your leg. Okay, so you're going to flex. If you stimulate the hamstrings here, you're going to flex your knee here. This is called this ipsilateral. So it's called ipsilateral withdrawal reflex. Okay, and then notice that then it crosses over, and then it can control the other muscles in your leg. So it's going to stimulate the extensors in the opposite leg and inhibit the flexors, like the hamstrings here. This is called this is a contralateral extensor reflex. So we have a combination here of ipsilateral and contralateral reflex here. So again, this is just to keep you safe. Okay, you flex your knee on one end, and you extend your knee at the other end. Okay, but those are the reflexes. So these reflexes, again, they happen at the spinal cord. They're involving skeletal muscle, so they're somatic. Some of them are monosynaptic, other ones are polysynaptic. Like the stretch reflex looks like it's monosynaptic, but the other ones that respond to a specific stimulus that might be painful or nauseous, it might be polysynaptic.